All right, won't keep you waiting too long. Let's just get it started. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Flamesnation Live. It's Pat Steinberg along with you, following another really hard to watch loss for the Calgary Flames. Live from our Sportsnet 960 downtown studios. Ryan just finished listening to the Big Show. He says, "Great Big Show today." Thank you, Ryan. It was we had a very heated edition of the Big Show, and there's just not a whole lot of positive to be focusing on when it comes to the Calgary Flames right now. Mike in first, Ryan's in, Vince is in, Sam, Chris, Ron, Josh, and Damien, all among those watching live with us on Flames Nation Live this evening. So, we can focus on that loss last night. We absolutely can. We can focus on tomorrow's game against Ottawa for sure, and we will on today's episode of Flames Nation Live. But, we also have, to me, the big topic now is what is the approach for the Flames between now and April 12th? And April 12th is this year's trade deadline. What is the approach between now and then? That, to me, is the most fascinating thing. Flames Nation Live, brought to you by our friends at Deuce Vodka. They bring you this live video stream and so many other podcasts and videos across the Nation Network. But thank you very much to Deuce Vodka for being on board. You can get Deuce Vodka in Alberta at your local liquor store. And if your local liquor store does not have Deuce Vodka in, make sure you hammer on them to bring it in. They're your celebratory vodka, and they're the Drown Your Sorrows vodka. And knowing the way things have gone for the Flames of late, they would be your Drown Your Sorrows vodka. There's my latest up at flamesnation.ca right now. And my feel on this year's trade deadline is that going in and buying like a team that is going to be making noise in the playoffs doesn't make a whole lot of sense. My feel is, if you're the Calgary Flames, this is not the time to be buying. This is not the time to be giving up a bunch of draft capital to be bringing in Ricard Raquel or Victor Arvidsson or Sam Reinhart or any of those other names that could be out there. Now's not the time for that because this team's playoff odds are slim. I also don't believe this is the best time to be selling off players that have big contracts and have been core pieces on this team for the last little while. I don't believe now is the time to do that either because this trade deadline is not the most conducive to that. So for me, this trade deadline, I think from a big name standpoint, should be a quiet one for Calgary. I think that's what makes the most sense for this team. I think the focus should be UFAs like David Riddick or like Derek Ryan. See what you can get for players like that. Sam Bennett, I believe, is kind of number one on my power rankings for what the Flames should do. Number one on my power rankings for who could get them the best return at the deadline. Because I think if you're talking about a team that knows they're going to the playoffs, and if you're talking about a team that knows they're going to be playing into May and June, then you could pretty easily convince me that those would be the type of players, the sort of type of teams that would be interested in unlocking playoff Sam Bennett. So I think Bennett is their best realistic, sensible trade target prior to the trade deadline. Now, maybe they go on a 7-game road trip between now and April 12th, and that changes. But there is one important thing to remember on top of this year's deadline if the Flames are going to be in a buy mode. I don't believe they should be buying, but if the Flames are going to be in buy mode, that 14-day quarantine needs to be taken into account. That 14-day quarantine that would turn today, if the Flames were to acquire somebody from the United States right now, they'd be missing 8 games and thus only available for 15 for Calgary. If the Flames were to make a trade at the deadline to bring in somebody from the United States, that player would be playing 6 games because they'd be missing 7 through the 14-day quarantine. It is something that needs to be taken into account when it comes to how the Flames approach this trade deadline. All of these things, to me, make me believe that buying at this year's deadline just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, 16 is what they need to win between now and the end of the regular season. They need to play 695, 700 hockey between now and the end of the regular season. All they have done is, as Pike put it in a DM to me yesterday, all they have done is be aggressively 500 this year. Why all of a sudden are they going to start going 696, 700 between now and the end of the season, right? Like maybe I'm not completely closing the door, but realistically, probably not going to happen. If you're Brad Treliving, your ownership, you're whoever's making the calls, are you really expecting this team to go on that run? Are you really keeping the door that open that they're going to turn into a contender and thus you're going to go and give up the draft and prospect capital you're going to need to bring in Reinhardt or Arvidsson or somebody like that? I don't think so. I don't think that makes any sense. So what do we got on our live chat today? Thank you very much for being with us. Vince is not worried. He still thinks they're going to make the playoffs. Most are on the other side. And hey, by the way, Vince, I'm all for that type of optimism. Give me that type of optimism all day long, because it gets a little negative. It's nice to be optimistic every once in a while. I wish I could share that optimism. Okay, so this question comes from Chris, who says, do we consider the rest of, by the way, Chris did not like the intro screen music. Chris, we're very limited with the rights-free music we can use, so I can't be playing like real music. It's got to be rights-free. So Chris, not a fan of the music, but does ask, do we consider the rest of the season a PTO? Well, I've kind of felt like not a PTO or a tryout, but I have felt ever since Daryl Sutter took over behind the bench 2.5 weeks ago, I felt that this is a evaluation period. This is a time to really determine what this group is going to be and what players you can and cannot or should and should not go forward with. So that's been my feel. And I do think if this continues to go the way that it has, I do think that there is, like, for instance, Mike Gold at Flamesnation has been very adamant that they need to bring Matthew Phillips in. Well, if they don't figure this out here, and if they don't get on a real crazy run, tough to convince me they shouldn't give Matthew Phillips a try. I mean, I think they should at some point. He's played well enough in the American League, right? Pat says, are there any players in the farm system that deserve a chance to play? Well, one of them is absolutely Matt Phillips. I think Ruzicka is a guy that you could look at with the numbers he's putting up down there. Connor Mackey is already made his NHL debut, but I think you could see him getting another try. We haven't seen Petrovic yet. He's at least up with the team. I think that'd be a guy that you could try, like Michael Stone, I guess. Maybe not in the same category, but there are guys that you could at the very least see how they fit and play. The guys that are most interesting to me are Phillips and Ruzicka, though. Sam says, realistically, the Flames need to win 16 of their 23 games remaining. My question is, if they don't start winning more games, is the season technically over? I mean, technically, no. If they don't figure it out, though, then, yeah, it's going to turn into the dreaded death march, which nobody wants to see between now and the end of the regular season. So it would be nice if they could make this interesting at least. And here is the one thing that I will say about making it interesting. Montreal's going to have 4 games postponed, and at least 3 of those look like they're going to be played after the end of the regular season. So, that could make things really interesting, that all of a sudden a team like Calgary or Vancouver, who are chasing Montreal, could overtake the Habs, and then Montreal has those games at the end of the year where they got to beat Edmonton if they want to get in and if they want to overtake Calgary. It's going to be a really interesting end of the season that could play out much differently than we thought. This says from Ron, write the year off, ignore the deadline, move the free agents. And then that's what I was saying a little earlier about, trade your UFAs, or at the very least explore trading your UFAs. And the one RFA that I would absolutely explore trading, because, well, he's been playing with a trade request over his head all year for the most part, and that's Sam Bennett. I believe, and then Chris says, what would Bennett realistically fetch you? I mean, I don't think you're getting a first-round pick for Bennett, But if the Flames are willing to eat some of that salary, like if they're willing to eat $1 million of that salary or something like that, I think you could get a second-round pick for Bennett for a team that is looking to unlock what they have seen from him in the playoffs before. We know that Bennett can play in the playoffs. We know that Bennett has been good in postseasons before. So, like, if you're a Boston or if you're a Philadelphia or trying to think of other teams that in the East that might be willing to take a run at that, I could see them giving up a second round pick. I don't think it's a guarantee, but I don't think it's out of the question either. And the other thing is, if you're trading a Bennett or a Ryan or a Riddick, be ready to take some of the salary because they're free agents. They're pending free agents, so that salary hits only on your salary cap for the rest of the season. That should not deter the Flames whatsoever. They should be willing to take or eat some salary to make a deal happen if that's what is going to make the deal happen. James says, I don't think they should sell or buy. Wait till the offseason. Plus, you've got Seattle coming in the league next year. I don't think it would be shocking that in the offseason we see big changes, hopefully with players and GM. So in that sense, James, I'm with you in at least when it comes to the big moves. Like, okay, if they're going to trade Monahan, don't do it at the deadline. If they're going to trade Gaudreau, don't do it at the deadline. If they're going to trade another player of that ilk, wait until the offseason because that's when you're going to have more teams in the mix, and that's when you're going to have a better ability to maximize. And you're almost, I believe anyway, this year's deadline with all the limitations, I believe you're almost guaranteeing a loss in a trade if you're making that type of move in the offseason. This one from Jesse that I don't agree with everything on. If this season is done, why not be proactive instead of always being reactive? Dubé and or Bennett for Raquel, Monahan for Reinhart, Gaudreau, and a prospect for Konechny. Framework, just saying, but it benefits both teams to pull the trigger sooner versus later to lay foundation for success next season. I won't read the entire thing, but just for instance, why would you be trading Dubé for Raquel? I mean, Dubé's 22 on an entry-level deal and looks like he's going to be a part of your core going forward. Raquel's 27, and while I think could be a nice asset on a team that is trying to compete, why would you do that if you're the Flames? That one doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Monahan for Reinhart, that's a not. Sabres aren't touching, and I'm not trying to kick you in the teeth, Jesse. I'm just saying, like, I wouldn't be making any of those types of moves because personally, I think you get better return for those moves come the offseason. I really do, especially if you're going to be trading a Gaudreau. And I also think that part of what the team needs to be thinking about is not making lateral moves on some of these. I think maybe trading a Monahan for a pick or a prospect or picks and prospects, maybe that is the way to go to give yourself a little bit more salary flexibility. I wonder if trying to stay competitive with this group or try to stick with being a playoff team, maybe by taking a step back and moving a Monahan out and not getting a player that can immediately replace him, maybe that's the way to go. And maybe it opens the door for somebody else. I'm wondering about that type of stuff right now. What else we got here? This from Zach says, joining late, but 16 wins the last stretch of games is doable. I say just go out and get Eichel, though. Go all in. Franchise center, something this team has never had. Let's go. The problem with that, Zach, is Eichel might be done for the season, so I don't think he's helping you right now. Again, and I don't think Buffalo's trading Eichel until the offseason. For the same reasons, I don't think Calgary should be trading other players. Because I think if you're Buffalo, you want to make sure that you have as many teams in the mix if you're going to trade Eichel as possible. You have less teams at the deadline than you do in the offseason. So is 16 of 23 doable? Yes. Is it likely? I would say no, and that would be me. I'm not saying it's impossible. It would be a great story if they do and the door is still open, but I would say unlikely compared to likely. Lou says, unfortunately, not going to make the playoffs. Trade your UFA players, and I can see a blockbuster trade with the core in the summer. Josh wants to see Matthew Phillips with Monahan and Gaudreau. I'd like to see Monahan and Gaudreau split up for a little bit. I would like to see that given a try, but that's another conversation. This from Andrew. Most agree the lineup is talented enough to make the playoffs. Deepest lineup, in my opinion, in last many years. So then it's a character issue when you can't beat teams like Ottawa when you need to. Not nice to call out character, but that's what it is to me. Here's my question, though. Is this team deep? Is this team good enough? Like, are they better than an average team? And I ask that question not trying to be a jerk, but I'm like, who are the elite players on the Calgary Flames? Who are the, and I like, a lot of the good teams have elite players. You know, like Toronto's got elite players and Edmonton's got elite players. Even if it's, you know, even if you want to call them top heavy, they still got them. You know, you take a look at Washington has elite players. And I'm not saying that every team does, but I would say that Vegas and the New York Islanders are the two teams that, you know, maybe don't have those elite players. Although Mark Stone, you could argue, Matt Barzal, you could argue. But those teams maybe don't have the same amount of elite players, but they're definitely deeper than Calgary is. And then you've got other teams, whether it's Edmonton or Toronto or Washington or St. Louis or Colorado. Those teams have elite players. So who are the elite players on the Flames? This year, maybe Tanev, but otherwise, who are they this year? They're not deep. They're like, we thought they were going to be deep, but they're not deep this year. So I'm wondering if maybe this is what they are. I'm starting to become more and more convinced they're just an average hockey team. And that is why I think so many big moves are needed this offseason. So that would just be me. What else we got here? Great stuff on the live chat, by the way. This from Derek says, time to ship out pieces like Monahan and Gio, maybe a couple of other guys, pseudo rebuild this offseason, be competitive again next season. Jesse says, because I was not a fan of some of his trades. He says, all good, Pat. I think rebuild's definitely a better option than staying the course. Vincent said would be nice to get Taylor Hall. That is the one that I am. Taylor Hall has 3 goals this year. He's making $8 million a year. I am very against, very much against going down the Taylor Hall road. I don't like that idea at all. I really don't. My boy Jefferson, their top guys were amongst the top in the league 2 years ago. Yeah, Jay, they were for 2/3 of a season. Where have they been since? Like, are we not at the point now where maybe that was the anomaly and not the norm? I mean, when have we ever seen Monahan and Gaudreau play like they did for the first 2/3 of the 18-19 season? Other than that, when have we ever seen that? And since that time, since about January 2019, more than 2 years, I know there's a pandemic in there, but playoffs, important stretches, what have they been? Like, and they're only getting older. Maybe that was the anomaly. Maybe what we saw from them that year was the anomaly. What else we got here? Maury says just tank, give up Levo, Nordstrom, Nestorov, Gio, and let some hungry rookies play. Jefferson still likes the depth. I'd put the 3rd and 4th lines up against most. And maybe I'm just in a critical mood. I don't know. But I have not seen the forward depth this year. That's been an area where it hasn't happened the way we thought it was going to happen. What else we got here? 960. Can Kachuk get his mojo back? I don't know. That's become worrisome as well. There's just a lot of worrying trends with this team right now. There's a lot of trends that you're like, that does not suit up for this team making the playoffs. The way Monahan's playing, the way Kachuk is playing. Gaudreau hadn't scored an even strength goal for 19 games prior to last night. I don't know. It's a really look. If they can turn it around, and if Daryl Sutter can get them to the results they need to be a playoff team, I'm all for it because that would be a great story. But again, there's 33 played and 23 left. All they've been is inconsistent and average this year. So while I don't think it's out of the question, as I said earlier, I don't necessarily think it's the most likely scenario either. That's interesting. A few more. before we wrap up this week's edition of Flames Nation Live. Great stuff. I love the conversation on the live chat today, even with Jefferson, which is that's not normal. This from Curtis says, the money spent in the offseason on this goaltender was a mistake. I believe Riddick has the ability. Definitely some offseason changes need to be made. I don't think Riddick's back next year. As an unrestricted free agent, my guess is he's probably going to look elsewhere. So if that's the case, would you not try to, unless things change here, would you not try to see if you can move him to a place like Washington or Toronto or somewhere else who's looking for goaltending help? Owen says, when will they utilize Johnny correctly? Needs to drive the play with his speed and puck control abilities to draw the opposing teams. I just lost my spot. To draw the opposing team. Where'd that one go? That comment was right there. I had Owen's gone, and then it just disappeared. I was reading Owen's chat, and then it just completely disappeared, talking about utilizing Johnny Gaudreau correctly. I do think that it is time to think about splitting up Monahan and Gaudreau. I really do. I think it's time to look at maybe seeing if a different center can't get more out of Gaudreau. I'm not saying you don't put them back together down the line, but maybe for a few games, see if it works and go forward there. Yeah, that's kind of where I am right now. Good stuff. That'll wrap us up. Coming up on Thursday, we'll do another one of these. Pike will stop by on Thursday. We'll do another Flames Nation Live. Great conversation on the live chat today, and I think that it's going to continue being really good conversation on the live chat. That's what happens when the team is playing the way they are, and with the trade deadline less than 3 weeks away. Once again, our sponsor is Deuce Vodka. Check out your local liquor store and see if it's there. If it's not, yell at your local liquor store to get them to bring Deuce Vodka in. Thank you for all the input today. It's been great. We'll talk to you on Thursday. Check out the big show on weekdays on Sportsnet 960 The Fan. Note the start time tomorrow. 3 o'clock with a 2 o'clock pregame show on Sportsnet 960 The Fan. Lots of stuff up right now at Flamesnation.ca rather. Pike's got some great trade deadline stuff up there. I've got my trade deadline primer up there. Mike Gold's doing great stuff on covering the Stockton Heat, all at Flamesnation.ca. Be well. We'll talk to you Thursday. It's been another edition of Flames Nation Live. Be kind. Be safe.